Hello everyone again. Welcome to the Magic XPI 4.5 overview. My name is Orgat. I'm a product manager here at Magic, specifically for XPI 4.5. We'll begin the overview shortly. Since I'm the only one who can talk through the webinar, you can post questions through the webinar client. At the end of the session, I'll take time to answer as many questions as possible. During the presentation, feel free to shoot questions as they come along. I will try, if time permits, during the presentation, before we go ahead and see the studio, to take a short break and answer questions at that point, and then again, whatever's left over to answer at the end. But again, feel free to ask. So, welcome. As you know, we've been working on 4.5 for quite a long time now. It's planned to be released by the end of July 2016, which is about a month from now. So let's start and see what's coming. So for this webinar, we'll concentrate on the following things. New studio and what it holds, what it brings. Magic XPI 4.5 enhancements, things that we've improved and changed specifically with the implementation of the new studio. A connector builder overview. Connector builder is something that people who heard about are quite enthusiastic and they really want to get to play with it and work with it. Bear in mind that it's a very big new, we will talk about it, I will cover some of it, but it's a very big topic. We will have separate webinars specifically for connector builder, and there will be training material that we will release with 4.5 on the official release date that's due. We'll talk about the Magic Monitor, which is the web monitor that was available in previous versions, 4.1 and 4.0, but the things that were changed and enhanced in the web monitor. And we'll talk about a small but significant new feature called the standalone environment editor. So, in 4.5, for those of you who've never heard of it before, we're introducing a fresh new studio, which is developed in Visual Studio, inside the Visual Studio shell. The main purpose of introducing a sleek new studio is, first of all, to improve the look and feel, make it more standard to what people are commonly using in the market nowadays. We sit inside the Visual Studio isolated shell. Sorry. But we took the opportunity of improving a lot of other user experience related issues like reduction of model windows. We introduced the minimap to the flow orchestration area, which lets you control what you see in the flow and move throughout the flow if it's a big one. Better to orient yourself. It's a standard IDE, which means if you're familiar with development within Visual Studio, within new environments, standard environments now, you should be able to accommodate yourself. You should be able to understand what you're doing. It's quite intuitive. We took the opportunity to improve performance specifically regarding the build and the checker. At this point, I want to emphasize that if you were a beta customer, we have released a beta version, more than one. If you were a beta customer, in beta versions, we didn't have in place the process for build and checker. Forgive me, I'll come back to that. So we did improve the checker and build. I do have some graphs. We have shared some graphs before regarding the checker and the build time between version 4.5 and 4.1. It's not across the board better for each project. So if you have a unique project, it might be the same time or maybe even a bit slower. But 95% and more of the project we have tested, and we're talking about big projects with very significant amount of data mappers and mapping connections in them, there's a significant improvement for the checker and build. And the fact that we are in a standard IDE makes it easier for us as provider of a software to cope with changes for new requirements. Just as an example, it's easier for our studio nowadays to work with version control. We will talk a little bit about version control later on, but it's general, easier to cope with market changes and new requirements for the studio. The main new features that we've added to the new studio, first of all, docked panels. Take a quick look at what it means, what the new studio looks like in general, and then what docked panels means. So this is just a quick overview of the new studio. There's a section for toolbox which contains all the different data mappers. We'll take a look at that later when you look at the studio. A flow orchestration area, same as we had before. A solution explorer, properties pane, which shows the properties of each item I'm currently standing on. Another window that shows checker result if you run the checker, output result for checker and debugger, and so on. But all of these are panes, which means you can customize the look and feel of the studio according to what you want. We'll do that later. We did a lot of work reducing the amount of modal windows, which means in the past, if you wanted to open the data mapper, it was window on top of a window on top of a window. Now it's actually working with separate documents, which means that at any given moment, I can have several open documents at the same time, showing several mappers within a flow, the flow itself, and another flow that called that flow. All of that is visible for the developer at the same time, which makes it a lot easier to make changes as I develop. Something every Magic XPI developer encountered during his project, I believe, is the need to add flow variables to a called flow, for example. So that's all very easy to do now because I can see the mapper that does the call. I can see the flow that is actually called, add a flow variable there, and at the same time go to another document. Let's see what it looks like. So this image is just to show you what is a document. There are a lot of other things that can be documents, but just as an example, so a flow would be a document. A data mapper within a flow would be its own document. Each one of the repositories is a document. So context variable, data converters, error repositories, all the different repositories that in previous versions were available for the project menu are now repositories on their own in the Solution Explorer, and each new repository is actually its own document. Each business process repository, which is the business process variables, for example, and each flow and each repositories. So the flow variables, the error, the flow errors, and so on. We introduced a minimap, as I said before. A minimap is basically a smaller window on top of the flow orchestration editor. You can remove it. There's an X button. You can close it if you don't want to use it. But in big flows, it helps you orient yourself within the tree. So it shows you where in the tree you are. You have the capability of dragging this blue circle and moving down in the tree. You have the possibility of clicking the flow itself and dragging it upwards, thus moving within the flow. And when we look at the studio later on, I can zoom in and show you. It actually marks the step that I'm currently standing on. So if I'm standing on a save message here, in the minimap, it's actually highlighted as well. We changed the look and feel and enhanced the database wizard and the expression assistor. When we open the studio later on, you'll be able to see what it looks like. And we enhanced the debugger. For me, this was a single most intuitive enhancement for a Magic XPI developer, meaning once I started working with the debugger in 4.5, it was very hard for me to revert back to older versions. The Biggest feature here is that debugger is always a click away, which means you don't have to step into debug mode, select your breakpoints, and then click play. It's Visual Studio. F5 puts you in debug mode. Of course, it still needs to run the checker in the build before it compiles the project so that the engine can execute something, but it's just a click away. And as I drag new steps, right-clicking the step always represents this menu, which lets you add a breakpoint on any given step within the flow. As I said before, it's not just a new look and feel. There are also enhancements that we made to the new studio. I would like to break them into 3 different sections. First of all, setting-wise, we have project-centric INI files. This means that because we are now running in Visual Studio, and it's not its own magic, the studio, the XPI Studio is not its own magic application, it doesn't have an IFE INI as it did before, which means if you want to add environment variable to your project, in previous versions you had to add them to the IFS INI for them to be solely for your project, but then the studio wouldn't recognize those variables. So now the studio has the same loading pattern of INI files as the server, meaning if something exists in the project IFS INI, the studio will be aware of it, and if it exists both in the IFS INI and the magic INI, the IFS INI takes precedence. Scheduling, we took the opportunity of moving the scheduler configuration screen to the service repository, which means you now use a service to set the scheduler intervals or the scheduler pattern, and then you just simply drag the scheduler step as a trigger and select the relevant service. The biggest enhancement here is, of course, you can edit the scheduler externally to your project. Previously, if you wanted to make, change an interval of a scheduler from 30 seconds to a minute, you had to rebuild the project eventually. Now it's done externally through a resource. And we introduced the standalone environment editor. This is something, again, we'll take a look at the end, but this came out of the need to replace something that was available in the old monitor. The old monitor was perished. It's no longer available. It's not part of the Magic installation. We have the web monitor now, which means there's no way to access the environment tab and change the setting of an environment when you move from development machine or a test environment to production environment. I'm talking about your resources and services, of course. So, of course, you can still use INIs and change those, but if you want to edit environment settings like repositories, like resource and services, this is something that's no longer available through the monitor. So we introduced something called the standalone environment editor, which is basically a small application that lets you load projects, set those settings. We'll see that in a few minutes. Just one thing that's very important to emphasize, the standalone environment editor comes with each type of installation of Magic XPI. This means that if you install Magic XPI as a server only or server monitor or the entire suite, the standalone environment editor is always there. So it lets you change the settings on your production server without having the need to install Studio there. The second section is new features. There are a lot, but the main new features within the Studio are JSON support, out-of-the-box JSON support within the data mapper. It's basically a new schema type in a data mapper. WCF Client, which lets you consume WCF services provided by external applications, and the connector builder. We had an SDK before, which lets you create connectors in Java and Magic. We introduced a whole new idea of a connector builder. It's not just creating methods out of a Java class, for example. It's actually creating a connector that has the exact same look and feel of a connector that was developed by Magic's R&D team. In fact, it's very important to emphasize that any new connector that Magic HQ will provide from now on will be built with the same infrastructure of the connector builder. We'll take a look at the connector builder shortly, but again, only slightly as a very short overview because it's a very deep and complex new feature, so we will provide training separately for that. And the last part of it is we had very great efforts to make sure that we are up to date with the latest Magic XPA version out there, so our runtime is compiled with 3.1. So studio time, let's take a short overview of the studio. At the end of looking at the studio, I will try to read some questions and answer as much as I can. But again, I won't take too much time answering questions because we will go back and forth between the presentation and the studio. So only a quick overview. So this is what the studio looks like when you open it in a clean environment. It's, again, docked panels, so you can play with the look and feel of the studio. And as it is with any docked panels in Visual Studio, you don't have to save anything. The last settings that you had in your studio are saved so that you can customize your environment to your liking and eventually it'll stay the same. Docked panels means, for example, if I don't want to see checker results, I can drag it and, I don't know, delete it all together. If I want to see it on the right side of the screen, if I want to see it on the bottom of the screen but throughout the entire pane, and so on. Say I don't want to see it at all, I can close it all together. Same goes to any other panel that you'll see here. When you open a new project, you'll get the orchestration area of the flow orchestration area in the middle of the screen where currently you only see a dark blue color. One more thing I wanted to show you here is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have different yet better version control support, simply out of the fact that we are now running within a Visual Studio isolated shell. There's a small checkbox at the bottom here. I have TFS Client, TFS Provider installed on my machine, so if I click Add to Source and I click OK to create a new project, let me just name it differently. It'll take a few seconds to run the discovery across the web to find my Team Foundation server. But eventually it'll show me where I can open it, and it's very easy and quite intuitive how to use version control. It's a very significant improvement, so I do want to show you it. So bear with me for a couple of seconds while the discovery is running, and eventually I will open a different project just so that we have something to look at that we're all familiar with. So I can select my TFS server and the route that belongs to me. Select the location of my project. I have it here. And the new project will be created. All the different project files, basically everything that's a repository is now saved as a file, so we can check it in and check it out as we develop. All of these can be checked in. And now, as you can see, my entire project is checked in. On the Solution Explorer on the right, you can see the locks, meaning it's checked in. This is a standard Visual Studio behavior. I can check something out. If I drag a mapper to a flow or I start developing a flow, it asks if I want to check it out, or it automatically checks it out depending if what my settings are with the TFS provider. We do recommend exclusive checkouts. Version control is, again, a very complex environment to work in. We will release proper documentation with the version. It's a lot easier to do than in previous versions of Magic XPI. So with that in mind, let me close my solution and open a project that most XPI developers should be familiar with, which is Magic XPI course. So now we're actually looking at an environment of the Magic XPI course. I did add a few NOP steps, no-ops, at the end of the tree just to make it a bit bigger. As you can see, I can zoom in and zoom out. And there's we do have the minimap here, which lets me see where I am exactly within the flow. So if I zoom in, as I said, I can drag myself throughout the flow and see the square of the mini map showing you where I am, and I can drag the square itself and move throughout the flow. Makes it a lot easier to orient myself, to know where I am. It is, I think, resolution-wise, it'll be hard for you to see, but trust me that the directory scanner is highlighted here. Maybe you can see it if I change it. Looks like a very bad resolution. Anyway, I see it clearly. Trust me. Another thing that is important to see here within the Studio toolbox is, as I said, a menu that shows connectors if I stand in the flow orchestration area. Different schema mappers, we'll see it in a minute when we zoom into a mapper. It shows basically the utilities that I can use in any given pen. On the right, I have the Solution Explorer. By default, it shows me all the flows and business processes. And there is a separate tree here on top, which is the repositories. Same as in older versions, we try to hold everything in a repository so that when you create a new context variable, you do it once in a repository and share it across the entire project. There are two very important repositories that are still repositories and are still handled externally as an XML, but you can't see them from here. It's a right-click away and going into settings. That's the resource and service repositories. The reason we excluded them from the tree is so that when you do decide to work with version control, those are unique per environment. We do not want automatically to handle them on the version control server. You can, of course, check them in, check them out, but it's up to you to do that. The last very important window here is the properties pane. Properties show me the properties of each step I'm currently standing on. So this is the email properties, directory scanner properties, flow properties when I stand on a flow, and so on. It lets you, once you get used to it, it's very easy to use. Lets you control all the settings from the same location for each new object or whatever I'm standing on. I did want to show you one more change, which is scheduling. As I said before, scheduler is now a service. So under services, I've created before a new schedule. I can, of course, create another one. Set the scheduler type. For example, let's change it to daily, run every 2 days at midnight and midday. So now if I click apply and I exit, I can drag a scheduler as a trigger. There's already one here. And I can select the scheduler that I've created as a service, which means those are all set externally to the project in a configuration file, in a, XML file, and those can be changed quite easily without having to rebuild my project. So I'm gonna pause here for a second, and I'm gonna try and read some questions. If they are related to what you've seen so far, I'll try to answer them. If not, at the end, I promise I will answer everything. So let me just open my questions pane. This release will finally run with Java 8. This release will finally run with Java 7, because the previous releases run with Java 6. We do plan to move to Java 8. It will be in one of the very hot, very close future releases. Will there be a Linux distributed of XPI 4.5? The answer is yes. It usually takes a few couple of months after the main release, but it will be available. Does it run the same Java version? So I've answered that already. So 1.7, and we do not no longer install Java as a root folder. It's a smaller installation of Java. We've placed everything we need within the JRE folder under the root of Magic XPI. It's smaller and same effective as installing Java altogether. Can Magic now, handle mapper generate files bigger than 500 Ks? I believe it always could. If the answer is no, and it's very important for us to know that, please contact your branch and send us your files. We'll make those tests. Hopefully, even with your mappers and your codes, at least someone from support should be able to attend those questions. And there's no actual limitation on the size of files. It's memory capacity, not something inherited from within Magic. Can we have details of usage of XPI 4.5 with version control? Yes, of course, multiple developers, versioning. I mean, just hopefully I understand the question correctly. Developing the same project with different developers. Actually, I came from the PS team in the US. It's something we did before. There's a development methodology we recommend, which is breaking the project into business processes, and each developer works on its own business process, eventually merging everything together. But doing it within version control makes it so that you can actually work on separate flows. There's no reason why one user cannot check out one flow and another one check out the other, work at the same time on the same project. Of course, versioning is handled, rollbacking, and everything related to different XPI versions. There are a lot of questions, so I am going to stop here. I see some of them are JSON related and so on. So let's take a look at the studio in depth. Let's go back to the presentation and then I'll show you a couple of more things in the studio. Hopefully I'll answer everything. JSON. It's a new schema type within the data mapper. Previously you could use XML, flat files, templates, databases. Now it's a new schema type, JSON, which can be used both as a source and destination. It supports visual hierarchy, supports schema validation for JSON. We are currently supporting JSON schema version 4 draft, which is the latest as of today. Of course, as always, we try to keep up with the versions as they come out, but something very important to mention here is that JSON schemas are validative schemas mostly, not descriptive schemas like XSDs for XMLs. So it's not the correlation between the schema and the XML is not as strong as it is with XSD and XML. But everything that you can describe in a schema, we should be able to generate a JSON out of. And it can be used as a schema type in the connector builder. Again, when we talk about the connector builder, which is in a few seconds, just bear in mind that there's an output for the connector builder. You'll build a connector. It's not a flat connector, a dumb interface, a flat interface like it was before. When you called methods, you can create whatever type of output you want, like the standard Magic connector. So it can be XML, it can be a flat file output, and it can also be JSON now. So if you want to create your own connector for sending REST requests in a JSON format to your application, you can use JSON as an output. You don't have to convert an XML into JSON eventually. WCF Client. Okay, first of all, before we talk about WCF Client, let's take a look at JSON in the studio. So I'm just going to open a mapper. When I double-click a mapper, again, see that I have a separate document for mapper. If we see the various documents, I have one flow open, another flow open, and then the document for the mapper. If I want to see, flow variables or context variable, I can open another document and add context variables. If I stand on a flow and I want to add flow-specific variables, shortcuts are still here, so Control-L to open the flow variable repository and add flow variables. So flow variables, context variables, my mapper and both my flows are open at the same time. I can move between them it's easier to develop that way. If I want to add a variable to a flow and then see it from another one. Of course, as soon as I add or update a variable, that mapper, even if it's open, immediately gets refreshed. So I've added JSON as a destination schema here. As you can see, the toolbox now doesn't represent connectors anymore. It represents mapper schema types. So JSON can be source and destination. And because it's mapper schema types, don't be alarmed if I drag a call flow to a source and I get an error because a call flow cannot be a source. I'm calling a flow. That hasn't changed. Previously it was unavailable in a menu, on a destination menu, but now there's no menu. It's easier to do. In order to work with a JSON, in order to create JSON or to work with JSON, I need to specify a schema. Now I'm specifying a very simple schema. I have it open here just for you to view. Oh, I've created it out of a JSON I found online using an online converter from JSON file to schema. Very simple primitive types like string and numeric, also some compounds. Just to see that we support hierarchy within the JSON schema type in a data mapper, so you can create complex JSON structures within your data mapper. And we do represent types, primitive types, like we do for XML, so you can see if it's numeric, alpha, boolean, and so on. And you can map, of course. So back to the presentation, WCF Client is another new enhancement that we've introduced. The easier way to explain what it does is, I was trying to find the WCF service to show you. The easiest thing I could do is just to find a WSDL file, a web service, and consume it as WCF. So it lets you consume web services. It's based on the Microsoft WCF technology, which means if someone provides any type of service, you can call it. It dynamically loads the client configuration file, which means if you get an example, someone created a WCF service and he wants you to consume it, and you get an example in .NET of how to consume it, you can create the same output from our connector using the schemas, and you can reach the exact same pattern of configuration that anyone does in .NET using the client conf file. Online you can find representation of everything done in .NET within the conf file of Microsoft. Again, this is an external application. It's not, the client conf is an external file. It's a Microsoft file. And the client conf configuration application is external. Again, it's Microsoft. The SVC util is basically a Microsoft util. And it lets you both dynamically load the client configuration file from the studio and change the configuration and make the changes externally to your project. So if you want to make changes, you don't have to recompile the project again. So it dynamically loads the configuration file. And it supports multiple bindings. If you were consuming web services before using Systemnet, basic HTTP bindings are all that's available. So multiple bindings are now supported. I do want to show you WCF Client real quick again. So I'm going to create a new resource. It's going to be a WCF type resource. Let's call it demo 1 for now. And as a service, again, I do have a couple of your WSDL saved. I'll take this one. As yesterday in the demo, I took the other one. All you have to do is load the WSDL file, click load. This goes through the same process that so Systemnet went through before, which means parsing a WSDL, a descriptive file of a web service, breaking it into an in and out schemas. Those are saved under the project like before. It does it in using a Microsoft technology and not Systemnet anymore, so the schemas are a bit different with schema 0, schema 1, schema 2, if you're familiar with the concept. But those are still available, can be opened from the mapper, and you can create a request based on those. But as I said before, you can also load the configuration file from the studio, and the server loads it dynamically when it runs. If you want to set, for example, for a specific binding proxy server, for example. So this is how you do it. That's all done, again, externally using Microsoft tools. Connector Builder. Connector Builder is the biggest new feature within Magic XPI 4.5. Lets you combine step and trigger in a single connector, what you couldn't do previously using the old SDK. Out of the box, support for studio utilities, which means within the connector that you develop, you have full access to everything that the studio can provide, be it text search, cross-reference, the expression editor with all the functions in it, a full data mapper screen, everything that checker and build. If you want to throw a specific message for validating a resource, all of that's available. And if you are familiar with your own development language, be it Java or .NET, it should be quite self-explanatory. We are releasing a connector with its sources as an example, and of course material for how to use the connector builder, and we will hold separate webinars to do that. Custom configuration UI for both step and trigger. The step and the trigger can be as simple as a single line of, I don't know, just set a path and this is all the connector needs in order to run, and it can be as complex. You can do within the UI whatever you want. Or you can develop the UI in .NET and do, I don't know, graphs in order to set your step. Data mapper support for dynamic step. If you have used the connector builder before, there was an XML interface, but it was a flat one. So even if you did use XML interface, you actually called methods in the backend, so it was a flat data mapper. Now it supports a dynamic data mapper. Java and .NET are currently available. Magic XPA to be determined when we will release Magic XPA as a connector builder language. Runtime isolation, which is a very cool feature. If you are using Java and you have your own jars for your own connector, it loads it from a separate location. So if you're using classes with the same name as another connector in Magic, they won't run over each other. Each new connector loads its own Java classes. Licensing, you have the capability of setting license to a connector that you develop. So you can set the license key, like IBPMon for the monitor, or IBSTD for the studio, or for other features that we have connectors for. You can set licensing for a connector that you develop to your own application and come to terms of how to sell it. Decide regarding how you want to sell it. And we support encryption, so you can use your own encryption files, encryption vectors, and so on. Magic Monitor. Magic Monitor is something that we've had before. I'm talking about the web monitor, of course, but we've added some cool new features, which means the legacy monitor has been retired. There's no longer a way to access the Magic Monitor from the Magic XPI. Let me try and show you real quick. So if you look at the Magic XPI folder with all the different parts and features, there's no old monitor. There's only Magic Monitor, which is the web monitor, which will open in terms the web monitor. RTView based web monitor, which lets you see information both from the space and regarding projects. If we go back here, the activity log and the ODS are now available through the monitor. The web monitor was available since version 4, but myself as a developer and other developers as well haven't actually been using it so much because it was lacking the main feature that we use in the monitor, which is the activity log. So we do have the activity log now available within the Magic Monitor. Not only it's available, but the way you filter and the way that you drill down into a process have been improved. You have capabilities of zooming into a process based on a single request set that trigger the specific flow and then go with it throughout the entire flow, or if you want into other flows it's called, or if you want only until a parallel branch started, and so on. So there are improved drill down capabilities based on different, those are just names now, but the root FSID, flow request ID. Again, we've added a way of explaining what those are. This is just a look at the help. So this is an image out of the help, which basically explains what is a root FSID, how to zoom into a specific process that started by a trigger calling one flow that called another, and if I want to see the entire flow, what I need to follow, and if I want to see just a single branch, what I need to follow. Basically, it lets you zoom into a process very easily and very intuitively to see where something might have gone wrong. The old filters, server ID, business process, flows, errors and whatnot, all messages, just bomb messages, those are still available. So if you take a quick look at the web monitor, I can look at the entire scope of projects. Of course, I can also filter only the runnings or the stopped. I have only one running now, so let's take a look at it. It's running in the back. It lets me see cool graphs like it could before of how licenses are being consumed. If you want to see, you can see peaks here and act accordingly if you want to understand what went wrong, how many threads have entered, how many requests have entered at any given time. If you do have a new tab, which is the activity monitor, activity log, lets you see messages like you could before, and I can stand on a specific message and then zoom in, as I said, to the root of that message and see only that process, or only that flow, or only one of the steps, and so on. All the other filters are still here. You can also see some new information that wasn't available before regarding the space. It's running in the backend to support the Magic XPI process. I can see here the status of different spaces and processing units. In 4.5, we actually do not just deploy one Magic space. We have another space which is specifically for the monitor process, and we have a processing unit called the mirror, which basically replicates information from the space into a backend database for the monitor. Those are available. I mean, you can see the status of the space here. Just a quick overview. When we deploy a Magic space now, we actually see 3 different objects within the space. So we have the Magic space as we did before, the info I just mentioned, and the mirror process. So with all that in mind, thank you for listening, by the way. Magic XPI will be available, Magic XPI 4.5 will be available for general use by the end of July 2016. But we do want people to get to know it even beforehand. So if you want to contact your local branch, if you want to use one of our releases for one of our beta releases, you can contact the local branch and ask for one. Bear in mind, it's not the latest version, but I mean, if you want to start getting a feel for the new studio and what it can do. Thank you very much. Let's move to questions now. Let me try to answer the best of my capabilities. To what extent is resource allocation possible, adding resources to Studio Server in XPI 4.5? This actually brings something into mind that I haven't showed you, which is the standalone environment editor. So as I said, if we do not install a studio on a server, you only have a Magic XPI server and you want to change, you want to allocate a resource, you want to make changes to a resource, there's a standalone environment editor under the Magic XPI installation. Actually, let me show it to you from a folder, it'll be easier. So we have the monitor, we have the studio as we did before, but we have the connector builder, which we've mentioned, but we also have environment settings, which is a standalone application that lets you open a project and set resources and services, including adding them. you can play with everything that was available from the project menu in the studio in older versions, like the IFS settings, different debugging flags, setting INIs, so environment variables into INIs. This is the project environment variable. I told you about the project-specific environment variables. The project-centric environment variables, the way that we load them first from the IFS. So this is how you set an environment variable into the IFS. This is how you set it into the Magic INI. So that's available in a standard, in a server-only installation as well. Hopefully that answered. To what extent can we customize icons in the minimap? You cannot customize icons in the minimap. You can customize icons of a connector that you create. Does the JSON means blobs and supports for JSON's Magic Web Services as well? The web services are still XMLs. HTTP, you can send your own type of blob. So if you want to send a JSON over the web, you use the HTTP post method. Where can we find information about connector builder training courses? Through your branch, eventually. Currently, it'll be available in the help, and we will release one of the connector, a new connector, MQTT, which is a protocol widely used in the IoT world. So we have a new connector, and we release it with the sources as examples. So if you want to develop something, you should find an example for it. And the examples are quite elaborate. So server in Java and .NET, trigger, step, in whatever language we could. So we provide examples for everything. On what release the studio will be based on? It's an isolated shell, so you don't have to install Visual Studio 2015. It's actually based on 2010. But again, if you have Visual Studio full installation, I mean, you can have your own full installation of 2015 and the shell will be 2010. And future releases will upgrade, of course, as we go along. Is duplicate cloning and renaming of project improved? Yes, of course. It's actually quite a big help topic. One thing that is not available in the nearest release will be available in SV1, which is planned shortly after the main release, is exporting and importing of resources, services, and flows between projects. But renaming your project, duplicating cloning is just copying the folder and renaming the SLN file. That's it. What's the difference from solution.sln file inside the project folder and the one on the level above? There is none. It's a matter of a checkbox of when you create a project, if you want to create the external folder, yes or no. You can select not to create the external folder, and then you'll only have one. Does XDI 4.5 support project templates? Can you set up your own project template within a Flow BP, which are pre-configured? By renaming a project, I mean, we do reuse code in projects. In SP1, the next version, it will be available, and it was available in 4.1. You could create business processes and save them as TPL files and share them in previous versions. It will be available in the next version of Magic XDI 4.5. I mean, it'll be a service pack that comes out shortly after. Can version control be shared across different Magic installations? Yes. What file and folders of project are kept into the TFS? Everything you saw on the branch of the navigation tree on the right, on the, Solution Explorer. So each file here is basically saved separately in the TFS server. So each repository of a unique instance, so each business process variable repository, each flow, and under each flow, each mapper, which is also a file once we click it. Okay, so it's a mapper, a flow, and each repository. What about backwards compatibility for 4.1 projects? Migration from 4.1 to 4.5 is seamless migration. You don't have to do anything in order to migrate your project. You click on the IBS file from the new studio and it migrates the project for you. You will get a log if something has changed, of course, when you change the implementation. I mean, some types of, I don't know, special characters might have changed and stuff like that, but you will get everything in a log. So there might be not a lot of work after you migrate from 4.1, but it is, the server remains the same, the projects will run the same. Can you modify the toolbox screen? For example, can you create tabs or make horizontal outline? Yes. I mean, you can play, again, I assume you're talking about the pen here, if I can move it, of course. If not, and I misunderstood the question, I'm sorry. Can you copy a flow to a different business process? Currently, no. Sorry, you can copy a flow to a different business process. You cannot export a flow between different projects. You can, within the same project, right-click, copy a flow, and move it. Can we do quick view step into features during debugging? Yes, same as before. I mean, you can see the context view, you can see everything is still there. Which source safe products are supported? It's API based, so everything that's MSSCCI compliant is available. I'm using TFS. All the examples will be TFS again, but I mean, Turtus SVN, everything that supports that protocol, everything that's Microsoft compliance will be available. How do I bring in my 4.1? I hope I answered that. Addition of version controls. Which version control systems are supported? I hope I answered that. Can the use of Git for this version? I hope I answered that. Addition of version control, multi-developers of projects is possible on flow level. Multiple users can change. No, flow is something you check out uniquely, but different flows for different developers, yes. Theoretically, you can also work on the flow variables and the flows separately, but we do not recommend. There's no actual scenario when one will develop a flow and another one will use the variables, but it is available. Will this presentation be available for downloads? Yes. Can you create JSON web services? No. I mean, you can, but not using the web service embedded in Magic XPI, meaning SysTNet. You can create web services using HTTP and use JSON in order to consume and provide. Is there more automation in support of content types, or do you still need to define UTF-8 ANSI Unicode binary everywhere? We haven't changed the way that the server does it. We are a bit more compliant with Unicode. Server-wise, there are a lot of changes to support Unicode pretty much everywhere. But again, it's not across the board. When Magic XPA releases version 4, we did a lot of work in the server to do it quite shortly after that's released, and that will be full Unicode. Is there support for multiple input-output schemas? Yes. Can you confirm that XPI will be can consume WebSockets? Sorry, I'm not familiar with WebSockets, what that means. Please forward the question again through the branch and we'll try to answer. SysTNet still used as web service and client? Yes, still there, still available. Data mapper, if you have schema containing subtypes, example customer subtype email, can you now create a single customer entry file with multiple email entries? You could always do that. It's just a matter of getting familiar with the data mapper enough in order to do that. If you need an example, contact support. I've done it multiple times before. Is the license structure unchanged? Yes. I mean, there is a new feature called, the license now will be Magic 3 instead of Magic 2, but Magic 2 licenses will still work in terms of running the engine. When will Magic Monitor support tree visualization of BPs and flows as the old monitor? It kind of does. It's just a matter of filtering. It's not. We haven't planned for it. You can filter based on BPs and flows as you could before, but it's not shown as a tree as it did before because it's not shown as a tree anymore here. It's a different kind of tree here. I hope that answered. Why should we have the mirror magic space? Mirror is basically the processing unit that writes from server to, from the space into your backend Magic XPI internal database. That's the purpose, and that's why you need it. Can you show how connector builder works? Again, we're out of time, but we will have separate webinars just for that. Does our local distribution also have information about courses, training? I hope so. If not, contact HQ support. But yes, it should have. How can all projects 4.1 be important? I think we've answered. Will XPI version 4 include new Microsoft Dynamics AX7 connector? Dynamics AX 2012 will be available. AX7 not yet, since they haven't published the standard API yet, as far as I know, and I've looked into it not so long ago. Can you tell us more about IoT support? MQTT is a technology that is widely used in the IoT world, it's kind of like a publish and subscribe protocol where you publish an event from a device. You can listen to it in Magic XPI and act accordingly, and you can publish events in Magic XPI and have the device act accordingly. If you use simple Arduinos, it's compliant with the MQTT protocol, so you can use the connector here and talk to devices. We actually have quite a cool demo about it we've done, which should be available as a video. You can ask the local branch and or distributor to see the video. Can blob be now saved into file system instead of database? Blob can always be saved into file system using the file management connector, or on the data mapper itself, save as file instead of as variable. How much difficulties to install and configure 4.5? Not at all. Same installation procedure as before. A bit more requirements, prerequisites for the server since it's bigger now. But the installation process itself is basically next. Is migration from 3.4 to 4.5 available? You have to go through version 4 in the middle. We might be able to migrate from 3.4 to 4.5. Yeah, it's a very good question. I need to ask your branch. I promise I will send an answer to the Magic support, so the answer will be available. It's on my to-do list now. Can you copy configured step between business processes? Yes. Can we import the existing project into? Yes. Addition to data mapper, can you do this in one data mapper call instead of multiple? Sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you do this in one data mapper call instead of multiple? Hopefully, maybe it's relating to something I've answered before. The answer is yes. Yes, you can. Most of the output types of an XML of hierarchy you can do in a single XML. Again, ask HQ support if you need an example. I'm sure someone can provide something. And if not, we would like to understand the limitation and address it. Thank you, everyone. Again, hopefully it was informative enough. My name was Or Gat. Again, Magic XPI, new product manager. It was nice to give you the opportunity to be familiar with me, at least. I mean, I couldn't hear anyone, but it's nice to try and answer questions. And again, thank you very much for the webinar. The presentation should be available for download through your local distributor. Thank you.